What is going on, Swells? Welcome back to another episode of the Always Compete Seahawks podcast. My name is Sam. Today I'm here to break down the offensive coordinator search updates that we've gotten since I uploaded my offensive coordinator rankings video, pros and cons, a few days ago. I decided that, hey, we got some news today. We got some news today. We got some news yesterday. I figured, hey, we'll bunch it all together. We'll make it work and we'll make it one big kind of update, some thoughts on some news that comes out, some implications. We're going to break it all down right now. Let's start with the news that came out today. The Seahawks will be bringing in Minnesota Vikings assistant coach Grant Udinski for an offensive coordinator interview. I mean, they did request it, so technically Minnesota could block it, but they probably won't. High likelihood that they won't. He will be coming in for an offensive coordinator search interview. And Udinski is a really interesting name. There are a couple things that really stick out when you talk about Udinski. He joined Minnesota's staff in 2022. He coached with Carolina from 2020 to 2021. He is currently listed as the assistant quarterbacks coach and assistant offensive coordinator. And it's like a bunch of different things, a bunch of different titles that he has. He played college football for Towson as a defensive end. He played at tight end as well. He was a first team All American in the Google Cloud Academic for his achievements in the classroom. So he's a smart fella. And that is really what you take away when you look at this guy because, like the resume isn't extremely impressive. He hasn't called plays before. It's not like he's like the offensive coordinator or quarterbacks coach for a team that just blew up this year. I mean, he's a quarterbacks coach, but he's the assistant. What's really interesting is that he is 28 years old. 28 years old. That is extremely young. I believe that is exactly the age when Sean McVay got his offensive coordinator job. And all things considered, this guy is kind of seen as a kind of a similar Sean McVay whiz kid. Not saying that he's a Sean McVay, but he is kind of seen as that kind of whiz kid thing where he's essentially been touted as the mentor of JJ McCarthy. He obviously did a lot of work with Sam Darnold. Apparently, McCarthy touts just he like has like a photographic memory with plays. He memorizes all these different crazy plays. A really interesting profile here with Udinski. He's kind of an unknown name, and it's really interesting to see what might come out of this. Obviously, there's a world where maybe this isn't an offensive coordinator interview. It's really a quarterbacks coach interview, or it's a pass game coordinator interview. We brought that up with Hank Fraley, the Lions offensive line coach. We brought that up where, hey, Fraley's going to be the head coach. I mean, the offensive coordinator. Maybe he's the run game coordinator. He calls the run plays, but then maybe he brings in kind of a co OC as a pass game coordinator. Maybe Udinski comes in and does that, given that he does a lot of work with quarterbacks. It's it's a really interesting look here. It could be a lot of different things. Could this be implications that the Seahawks have maybe been interested in Josh McCown and maybe they see him as an assistant to Josh McCown? For instance, Josh McCown is the quarterbacks coach for the Vikings. Now, probably if he does become the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, Udinski is probably much more likely to take a job just as a promotion, assuming that the Vikings would offer. Apparently, Kevin O'Connell loves this guy. A lot of people see him as kind of a second coming of Kevin O'Connell. So it's really interesting to see like the implications, what this really means. He could be coming in just to get an interview while they can bring him in for an OC job and then or for an OC interview, and then maybe they'll say, hey, we don't like you as OC, but we just hired Hank Fraley. We think you could be a really good pass game coordinator slash quarterbacks coach. You come in, you do that, you'll lead the guys, you'll be the leader in the pass game, and you can build up your kind of repertoire there because obviously he's 28. He's very young. He's a quick riser, but still very young. He's got to get more experience. I don't know if I would necessarily be like, oh my God, this guy is the perfect OC hire because frankly, I don't think we know enough about him. I don't think he knows enough, frankly, about coaching at this point to be the offensive coordinator. But regardless, it's interesting. I think it's something to keep an eye out for. We will see how maybe that develops if the Seahawks do end up hiring someone who maybe is more run focused or like solely run focused, maybe Udinski makes a lot of sense as an offensive coordinator can I mean as a pass game coordinator candidate. We will see how that develops in the coming days. This also leads me to a Brady Henderson report, kind of breaking down today's reports that the Seahawks, to his knowledge, the Seahawks have brought in more candidates than the ones that are publicly known. Well, that's kind of obvious. It is interesting because, as we remember, with kind of the Shane Waldron hiring, there was not a lot of necessarily buzz about, sorry, I dropped my pen, about Shane Waldron necessarily being this like favorite for the job, this guy that's like the immediate front runner. And I think that we could potentially see something here where where breaking news, the Seahawks hire blank blank, and we're like, we didn't know that they interviewed blank blank for this job, So it's gonna be interesting to see who the Seahawks have brought in. You wonder maybe are they gonna try to get some scoops out of that in the coming days? We'll see maybe who is getting brought in for interviews, who they have already brought in, because you have to imagine that they've already interviewed other people than the ones that are known. I believe Fraley and Thomas Brown interviewed on Friday, last Friday, and I believe that Clint Kubiak interviewed today for the job. And we will break down Kubiak later in this episode. But overall, just a lot of updates with the Seahawks OC. Grant Udinski, a guy who's really interesting, a really interesting name. I would keep an eye out on him. We'll see how he maybe plays out, how he might fit into this puzzle as we go. And that Brady Henderson report about, guys coming in, guys that we don't know. And we will see how all that plays out. See if the Seahawks do indeed go somewhere a little bit unexpected, a little bit out of the box, a little bit something that we haven't been prepared for because we didn't hear that name in the process. Now, you might be able to assume that, hey, if they leak names to the media, that probably suggests that they really like the guys that they're leaking. Or maybe it says, hey, we don't care that you know that we're interviewing this guy. We're just gonna interview him just for the hell of it. When in reality, we really like this guy and we're gonna keep it under wraps. Who knows? Mike McDonald runs a tight ship from what I understand, and we will see how all of that plays out in the coming days. The second topic that I really wanted to break down here is yesterday, that bombshell report. Mike McCarthy will not negotiate a deal with the Cowboys. He will be out as the head coach. And obviously, I'm not saying Mike McCarthy should be the new OC because he might get a head coaching job somewhere. Chicago is apparently really deep in that run there. But what's more interesting is a potential familiar face returning to the Seattle sideline. If you remember, from 2018 to 2020, the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks was Brian Schottenheimer. And mixed feelings on Schottenheimer. I will kind of break down those mixed feelings and have a little retrospective on Schottenheimer, but I think that this is something to really keep an eye on. John Schneider likes bringing back guys that he knows. It's a Seahawk thing. If you've been in the building and they need a guy on just on a quick notice, hey, we need to fill a spot, he will probably look to people that he already knows. Brian Schottenheimer is a really interesting name. He was the Cowboys OC. Since Mike McCarthy's leaving, it is extremely likely that that staff will also be leaving, and Schottenheimer will become available. Schottenheimer in Seattle, 3 years from 2018 to 2020, top 10 offenses in all 3 years. All 3 years, they also made the playoffs, and all 3 years were kind of Russell Wilson's career years in Seattle. But it's really interesting. There were a couple things that led to Schottenheimer losing his job. Mostly it's because the fans didn't like him. A lot of people thought that he cost Russ some MVPs because he was extremely committed to running the football. That obviously factors into how Mike McDonald wants to run this team. But regardless, Seattle fans really did not like him because of how committed he was to running the football, even though in those 3 years, Chris Carson had a bunch of great years. Rashad Penny had a few good years. That was a really good running team with poor offensive lines, which also factors into how Mike McDonald wants to see it. But a lot of people thought he cost Russ MVPs. And also, the Schottenheimer offense had a consistent trend of getting off to really hot starts and then fading out in the second half of the season. That was a consistent problem, especially in 2020, where you have that let Russ cook stage where by week 5, where Russ is like tying records for touchdowns within the first 3 weeks of a season. uh Schottenheimer is like getting head coach buzz. He's like seen as the hottest name around. And then, in the last however many games, what was it at that point? 13 games, Russ, I believe, threw 26 touchdowns over 13 games. Good, pretty good, but not as good as it was. So when that offense fades down, by the end of the year, regardless, teams will feel negative about that season and how the offense performed, because it's about the last impression that you leave that is the most important, the most relevant in people's minds. No one's going to remember the great first game you had if the last game sucked. I think that's important to remember. Schottenheimer, low. He wasn't technically fired. His contract expired, and Seattle said, we're not going to renew you. They bring in Shane Waldron. We know how that worked out. Schottenheimer goes to Jacksonville. I believe he was like a quarterbacks coach, and then he goes to Dallas to be the OC. Last year, had a really good year with Dak, and had a Tony Pollard had a career year, and then this year Dak gets hurt. But guess who breaks out? Rico Dowdle. Schottenheimer has a way of making the run game really work. And I think that's really interesting. And it's something to really remember, because John Schneider has the familiarity with Schottenheimer. Mike McDonald knows that Schottenheimer can improve the run game a lot. I think all in all, that makes for a really interesting pair, and it will be intriguing to see if they bring him in, because I'm sure that the Cowboys will be comfortable letting some of these coaches talk to other teams. I don't think Jerry Jones is gonna be like, no, I like Brian. I'm gonna keep Brian here. I'm not gonna let him interview with nobody. If you want to be a head coach for the Dallas Cowboys, you gotta like Brian Schottenheimer. I don't think he's like that. I think he's fine moving on. I think they're gonna just let that go. I think he will get a job somewhere, maybe not as an OC, but he definitely will get an assistant job. The question is, does Seattle bring him in? I think it's interesting. I would not hate it at all. I think he has the track record. He's called plays before, and he's had the track record of success in Seattle. He's had the track record of success in the run game, and he's had the track record with quarterbacks. Dak and Russ had good years. It's not like he's a run only coordinator where quarterbacks just can't function. Quarterbacks play well. It's about this remaining reputation. But if you look at the numbers are good. Top 10 offenses all 3 years, legitimate offenses, legitimate Russell Wilson career years, legitimate Chris Carson career years, where he's running for 1,000 yards and he's really pounding the ball with pretty poor offensive line play. That's the kind of Mike Iupati, Jordan Simmons, Ethan Posick years on that offensive line. All in all, Schottenheimer, I think, would be a really good name. He was not a name I had on my radar because, frankly, I figured Mike McCarthy was going to stay in Dallas. That bombshell report changes things a lot. Keep an eye out on Brian Schottenheimer. He might be coming in. He is a free agent. It's interesting to see how that's going to go and how Seattle fans would react. Let me know in the comments what you would think about Brian Schottenheimer, because am really interested to hear about your thoughts. My final topic that I'm going to talk about in this OC update video is the Browns. The Browns were one of kind of the few teams that had a hired head coach, but a vacant OC job. They fired Ken Dorsey, who struggled a lot. He wasn't really calling plays. Stefanski was calling plays, but the Browns, regardless, they fire their coach, they fire their OC, and they have a head coach, which means that OC job is going to fill up really quick. And there was some buzz that, hey, Clint Kubiak, Seahawks and Browns for Clint Kubiak. And everybody was like, well, Kubiak coach with Stefanski in Minnesota. He's familiar with Stefanski. Stefanski really likes him. It's got to be Cleveland. And I was at work today, and I went to the bathroom and I checked my phone, and I saw that the Browns hired an OC, but I didn't see who it was. Like, the first notification that came up was the Browns OC vacancy is filled. And I believe it was like Tom Pelissero or something that said that. And I'm like, oh, there it is, Clint Kubiak, because he interviewed in Seattle today. He interviewed with the Browns yesterday, and I figured, he didn't like it in Seattle. Seattle didn't sell him. He just went to Cleveland. He said, oh, screw you. No, they promote Tommy Rees, the former college superstar for Notre Dame. He's 32 years old, to offensive coordinator. He was already in the building. I believe he was the pass game coordinator. He was kind of the favorite, but Kubiak picked up a lot of steam in the past few days. Regardless, Reese is now the offensive coordinator, and Clint Kubiak is still not hired. Like I said, he interviewed with the Seahawks today, and many people kind of say, well, that really leaves Clint Kubiak as like Seattle already interviewed him. All of these teams are going to take a little bit of time to get their head coaches hired. Obviously, you saw Vrabel go to the Patriots, but regardless, I think that it's going to take time, especially with teams that are going to be waiting to hire guys like Ben Johnson, guys like Aaron Glenn, guys like, you know, um, Joe Brady, you know, teams that are still in the playoffs, teams that are going to want to hire those coordinators will have to wait, which means that their offensive coordinator vacancies will also have to wait, which means give Seattle a huge head start on Clint Kubiak, given that they interviewed him today. Not saying that because Seattle's the only team currently on the board that he's just going to go to Seattle now. Maybe Seattle doesn't like him. Maybe they say, hey, you know what? We do like Hank Fraley and we do like Grant Udinski. We're going to bring them in as a pair and they're going to cook. Maybe that's what they want to say. However, like I said in my last video, I think Clint Kubiak would be a really good, solid, steady hire. A guy who has called plays before, a guy who's from that San Francisco Shanahan background, and a guy who knows how to run the football. It's that San Francisco offense is built on running the football well and creatively and using that to pivot into play action passes to get easy throws. That is the bread and butter of that Shanahan system, and Seattle would love to take from that. I think that in general, um, you know, Kubiak still could go to a lot of other places. And, he's going to have a lot of connections. For all we know, he could return to New Orleans if the head coach likes him. There could be more OC openings. Sometimes teams make the playoffs and fire their OC regardless. There will be more openings. There will be more openings filled. Maybe Kubiak starts to get a wave of interviews once a few of these head coaches go off the board. Regardless, I think Kubiak is a name to watch. I think that if Seattle really likes him, he will be hired in the next few days. That being said, I don't have sources. I don't know that they really like him. A part of me feels like they do. A part of me feels like his resume means that he kind of has to be one of, if not the top dog currently, at least from people that we know that they have publicly interviewed. I think Kubiak is a name to watch. I think he'd be a great hire. I would really like it. I think people are giving him a lot of flack because he had a mid-year with the horrible New Orleans Saints offense that was extremely injured. And when they were healthy, they weren't a very good offense on paper. Then they got extremely injured, and he was still middling. He was kind of in that same range with Ryan Grubb and Seattle. And obviously, Seattle has a lot more things to work with on that offense. Regardless, like I said, I think if Kubiak is Seattle's guy, Seattle knows for after today that they really like him. He will be hired in the next few days. They will try to get out in front of that OC wave after some of these head coaches go, especially next week, where if we see you know Lions lose or the Bills lose, we could see a wave of head coaches get hired. Stay on the lookout for that. And all in all, I think Kubiak is a definite name to watch. And I think we'll know more and more as the days go on. And of course, I will be covering all the updates for you. I am monitoring this quite literally 24/7. So stay on the lookout for all the news. And I will obviously keep bringing you guys content as the news rolls out, and especially once that coordinator is hired. In the meantime, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, subscribe if you will, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment with your thoughts on Kubiak, on Brian Schottenheimer, with Grant Udinski, with the thought of a two-wave offensive coordinator system. Whatever you guys think, comment it. I do respond, and I do love hearing the opinion that you guys share. I want to thank you very much. I hope you enjoy your night, and peace out.